Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. So, Mark Carney is going into the federal election debates tomorrow and Thursday in a far more vulnerable position than he was in last week. Last week, the Liberals were actually doing quite well. In the polls I trust, they were leading by 4 to 6 points, and that was because of the Trump Liberation Day tariff announcement. That is a great news cycle for the Liberals to play off of because they are running a mostly anti Trump anti American campaign. Since the Liberation Day tariffs have basically just been dropped and the only ones remaining on Canada are in part because of Carney's stupidity in negotiating, they are now in a not so hot position right before Carney has to debate in French today, and then we have the English debate tomorrow. The Green Party actually got dropped from both debates because they didn't meet the requirements. While they do have two sitting MPs, they didn't have candidates in 90% of the ridings that they were planning on contesting. I say planning on contesting because the Bloc Québécois obviously just needs 90% of ridings in Quebec because it's standing in the elections, and they also have enough of a percentage of the vote. I think that also overrides that. But I'm not sure if that's going to be a good thing or a bad thing for the Liberals to not have the Greens on stage. It does mean that all the other leaders have more speaking time to attack Carney, and they don't have to share it with some unsubstantial Green Party leader. At the same time, I'm wondering if in the French debate it would have been good to have even more people on stage who all have far better French than Carney, because it's more embarrassing to have the worst French out of 5 people than the worst French out of 4 people. But now I want to get into the numbers and demonstrate to you where Mark Carney could easily start losing this election if he even has a subpar debate performance. Before I get into it, though, guys, just a reminder to like this video if you've been liking my federal election coverage. Leave a comment. I like to hear what people think on the topics of the day. And subscribe if you are not yet a subscriber and you want to keep up with my reporting each day. So here is the latest numbers from Abacus Data. And Abacus Data, by the way, has always been the pollster this entire election cycle I've put the most trust into. Even last week, when they had the Conservatives down by 6 points, I would still tell you that they are a good pollster. It just reflected that the news cycle was particularly good for the Carney Liberals. This week, not so much. And in fact, what I think we've been hitting, as you can see here, this week the Liberals are at 40%, Conservatives 38, NDP 11, Bloc 7, People's Party 2. I really don't think they're going to get 2. In fact, I think that the People's Party might not even get 1%, and the Greens have 2. So this is a very bad position for the Liberals to be in. In fact, I ran these numbers in the 338 election simulator as closely as I could get them because they only allowed you to slide the bars within their own confidence intervals. So I couldn't put the NDP up to 11. I couldn't quite put the Bloc Québécois up to 7. But if I put the numbers around this, even giving the Liberals 4.5% and the Conservatives just a flat 38, this, in fact, 40% Liberal, 38% Conservative, 11 NDP, and 7 Bloc results in a conservative minority government. And again, I'm not just saying this because it's wishful thinking. Just when you're on the ground campaigning, I am in Nepean, the riding Mark Carney is running, and I'm helping Barbara Ball. In this riding, it doesn't feel like this is going to be an election where conservatives only get 38%. We're probably more at around 40%. Maybe the liberals are at 41 or 42. But I think the conservatives are going to be able to get 40. And so let's just go down a little bit deeper and show what's happening. Well, I just do want to note on the side there, you can see since last week, the Liberals have actually lost 2%. Conservatives had no change. The NDP gained 2 and the Bloc gained 1. I think you actually could see the NDP at 11% and the Bloc at 7. That's realistic because of all the scandals going on for the Liberals right now. What I was going to mention earlier, sorry if I'm a little bit scatterbrained, but I think why also the Liberals were able to get ahead last week and it didn't feel like things were really affecting them negatively, the bad things that were happening on the campaign, were because of the fact that critical mass hadn't been hit yet. Justin Trudeau was a terrible Liberal leader and prime minister. And when Carney started having a few scandals, I think people who were planning on voting Liberal were still willing to think, well, he's new, people make mistakes, but he's still much different than Justin Trudeau. This week, we were hit by like 5 new scandals for Carney, on top of the dozen we had before. Now I think you're going to start peeling away at Liberal voters along the margins, thinking, oh crap, This guy's literally no different. He is willing to engage in the exact same unethical behavior. Here is the chart for people certain to vote, and this should also scare the liberals. Certain to vote, the conservatives are actually leading. The conservatives are at 40%, the liberals are at 39, NDP at 12, Bloc 7, Greens 2, People's Party 1. This would be a pretty large minority government for the conservatives, if not cusping on a majority. Because the problem here for the liberals is that when the Bloc Québécois are at 7%, their 39 or 40% represents gains in Quebec. But if the Bloc Québécois are also maintaining what they had before, the Liberal gains are mostly just in Montreal where they already win all the seats. Or they might get a little bit higher in Quebec City, or they might get a little bit higher in northern Quebec. But Quebec's one of those weird provinces, and there's a few other provinces like it. New Brunswick is kind of like it as well, where certain regions go for a certain party so hard that the polls have to shift wildly in favor of one party over the other in order for them to actually gain seats. Saskatchewan is a lot like this. We have the NDP cannot win elections in Saskatchewan very easily because after they win all of Saskatoon and all of Regina, they then need a rural seat or two. And those seats are like 50 plus percent Saskatchewan party, and even then there's some other right-wing parties that end up getting 2 or 3 or 4%, and the NDP comes in at 35. So you can imagine that the NDP have to gain massively in the polls in order to unlock any of those rural seats, and that's the same thing in Quebec. The arm of Quebec that's along the main U.S. border, that's very conservative, and it's not going to stop being conservative. There are a couple seats in Quebec for the Conservatives or Quebec City that they win, but the next best party to win those would be the Bloc Québécois. The Liberals then win the island of Montreal by dictatorship numbers for the Liberals. The Liberals usually don't win ridings by massive numbers, but in Montreal, they can win seats by above 50%. And so when the Liberals are at 42% in Quebec, that means they're winning sometimes these seats by 65%. It doesn't mean they're winning any of the Bloc Québécois suburbs. They need to be near 50% to actually start unlocking a lot of these Quebec ridings. So if the Bloc Québécois comes in at 7%, not 5% or 4% like other pollsters are showing, if they come in at 7, it basically means the Liberals made no gains. And because many of the Liberals' national polling gains have been in Quebec, it means that in the rest of Canada, they're sucking. They're getting blown out by the Conservatives, and that is when Nepean is absolutely in play and Carney could lose his own seat. Because much of that 39% is in Quebec, which means they're far less everywhere else, and the Conservatives don't do that well in Quebec, which means they're far more outside of Quebec. So now let's go down to another part of this poll that is very interesting. And you can see my point right here. Liberals are doing quite well in Quebec, but if the Bloc Québécois can maintain that 32%, it means all that 39% is all concentrated in Montreal. Now let's go down to the polling on Carney. This is a problem for Carney. Carney, before, in the past couple of weeks, when his approval rating was at 48 and 47, that was during the Liberation tariff talk. That was a very good news cycle for the Liberals. Now that we're out of the Liberation tariff talk from the United States, his negative has gone from 28% to 32%. He has jumped up by a 4% on his disapproval rating, and his approval rating has slipped from 48 to 45. Naturally, it takes people a while to kind of change their minds on leaders. So the one thing that Carney does have going for him is there's only a couple of weeks left for people to change their minds on the man. And the problem, though, is early voting hasn't really started yet. And so what he's having to do is he's having to try his darndest in this debate to have it not slip anymore. Because if people start wavering on him, that's what could suppress his early vote turnout. Because even those who like him, if he has a bad debate performance, then maybe certain other people are already starting to go from approving to disapproving. Maybe people don't show up for early voting because they don't really know what to think about him anymore and they need a little bit more time. Whereas the Conservatives, the people who like the Poilievre really like him. And obviously Poilievre has a much higher disapproval and approval rating, or because way more people know of him. When you actually add up Carney's approval and disapproval, there is a good third of Canadians who don't really know much about the man. When you go to Poilievre, there's maybe like 10%, 15% who don't know what to think of him, and they're probably just neutral observers at that point. But he's 40% approval to 43% disapproval, a big turnaround from a couple weeks ago where he only had 38% approval and 44% disapproval. And here is another thing that we have. This is the chart I wanted. This is the thing that this election is all about. If the election becomes about Donald Trump, the liberals win. If the election becomes about the economy, the conservatives win. And the good thing for the conservatives is that as time has been going on, what people want the election to be about has gone from Trump to mostly economic issues. Look at this. These are competing election narratives. Each of them have the Trump factor in them. But let's look at this first one. If the election is between dealing with Donald Trump and delivering change and policy direction, it started back in late March. 54% people wanted it to be about Trump, 46% wanted it to be about change. As of today, it is 45% Trump to 55% change. Other polls already had the cost of living issues leading or dealing with the economic growth. Those two framings were already beating Trump, but they have since then increased their share by a little bit. And what you have to remember too is that the NDP are also competing on the anti-Trump side. And so because they're doing that, that means if the election is about Trump and the economy, and the conservatives are leading with the people who care about the economy, Carney and the Liberals, by the late stages of the election, might be having to split 45% of the vote with the NDP. And so they're just hoping that the NDP comes in real low with their own support. Because if the NDP comes in at 8, 9, or 10%, the Liberals can't win. Because the NDP puts a massive drag on the Liberals in Ontario and Manitoba and Vancouver where they need to, or BC, although most of the Liberal seats are just in Vancouver. Those are the areas the NDP put a drag on them. And then obviously the Bloc, if they can come in at 6, 7, or 8%, they put a massive drag on the Liberal seat count in Quebec. You can win 40% of the vote as the Liberals and come in with only 120 seats if your regionals suck. And right now the regionals are not looking great for the Liberals. And so if Carney has a bad debate performance here, he comes in a little weak and his numbers start softening even more, probably can't win anymore. Probably is losing the election. I want to pull up this one chart from Angus Reid. I don't even like Angus Reid. And I've even explained before why they're sampling oversamples Liberals. They get all of their data from old air miles. All they use is air miles data. So the people who they poll disproportionately fly, which means they disproportionately work white-collar jobs or are like kind of the jet-setting crowd who are more prone to being liberal. And so even then, when they have the conservatives only falling behind in their poll by 4 or 5 points, I consider that a win, considering who they're polling. But even their polls, and this part should be accurate because they're just saying of the people who are voting conservative and of the people who are voting liberal, who is more confident to show up. Look at this chart. While all the parties have been increasing over time, because naturally, if you are thinking about voting for a party long enough, you're eventually going to firm up your commitment to voting. The Conservatives are currently at 76% of people saying that they're definitely going to be voting for the Conservatives. The Liberals are at 63. Not fantastic. Only 63%, less than 2/3 of Liberals are very committed to voting Liberal. That is, again, why the debate matters so much. If Poilievre can throw some doubt in these people's minds and they stay at 63%, they drop or they only go up a little bit more, so they're only 70% by election day, that means if the Liberals are at, let's say, the Liberals are at 42% of the vote and the Conservatives are at 40% in terms of polling, but the Conservatives draw out 90% of the people who are going to vote for them and the Liberals only draw out 80%, Conservatives win. Conservatives would win by a landslide in that scenario. So this is to build some of your confidence up that there is absolutely not just a path for the Conservatives to win, but a very good path for the Conservatives to win. If Poilievre has a good French and English debate performance, I think this is now an 80-20 election for the Conservatives to win. It would be Poilievre's election to win then. Right now, this is currently an election for Carney to lose. I consider it a 50-50 election, but you would say that Carney is still technically in the driver's seat based on what the most of the pollsters are saying. Again, when we go to the committed voter section of these polls, it looks like the Conservatives are doing better. Even Advocates data says those who are confident in their choice, it then leans 41% conservative to 39% or it was 40% conservative to 39% liberal. Big difference there. Yes, it's only 1% difference, but that's where elections are won. Very few elections are won with somebody winning 50% of the vote and the next best person coming in at 17. It's usually 43 to 39 or 44 to 40. That's where you're going to find the conservative minority or majority government within that 3 point margin. Anyways, so that should be it for me today, guys. Hopefully, you like me breaking down the polls and using it to contextualize what we're seeing. But I will be back, of course, a bit later to talk more about the election, to talk about Carney's campaign. I will be breaking down the French debate tomorrow. I'm not sure if I'm live streaming it tonight because obviously I don't speak French, and you guys don't need me just telling you what I think about the translators speaking for the candidates, but I will try and live stream the English debate tomorrow on Thursday. So, anyways, with that being said, I'll see you guys later.